And let's go to the document to give our viewers a sense of what kind of testimony is coming from Michael Cohen regarding Jeremy Rosenberg's texts. Blanche asks, those texts were around the time you testified before the grand jury. Cohen, yes. Blanche, about how you were going to hold Trump accountable. Objection. Sustained. Cohen, yes. Blanche, there was a leak that an indictment had been leaked to the media. Objection. That one's overruled. Blanche, do you remember that prior to the unsealing of the indictment, it was leaked that President Trump had been indicted? Cohen, yes. Blanche, Detective Rosenberg confirmed to you that the New York Times article was accurate and that President Trump had been indicted? Objection. This one's sustained. Blanche, did Detective Rosenberg confirm that it was done? Cohen, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. And they show, again, these text messages. Blanche, your testimony in the text that you just read is Detective Rosenberg identifying a newspaper article. That's what it says, yes. Blanche, Detective Rosenberg didn't tell you that they told the New York Times before they told you. And Cohen says, I'm sorry, I don't understand your questioning. It's confusing.
Interesting, because in some of these very direct, succinct questions, Cohen's answer is, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. And that's kind of a pattern that we're seeing emerge right now. Here's another statement. Blanche, your testimony is that the text that you just read is Detective Rosenberg identifying a newspaper article. Cohen, that's what it says. Yes, Blanche. Detective Rosenberg didn't tell you that they told the New York Times before they told you? Again, Cohen, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. It is confusing. Blanche, did Detective Rosenberg tell you before the indictment was released and unsealed that they told New York Times about the indictment before they told you? Cohen, no.
I'm wondering, Chuck, why do you think this text exchange between Cohen and the district attorney's office would be important for the defense to bring up here?
Yeah, I'm not sure it is, frankly, Anna. I mean, look, and it's much easier to do a cross-examination in a TV studio than in a courtroom. So with that said, I think there's 2 or 3 things that you want to adduce on cross from Michael Cohen. He's biased, he's inconsistent, he's a convicted perjurer. That seems to me to be about it. And if you try to do too much more, and if you take too long to do it, you run the risk of losing the jury. If you could adduce those 3 points, he's biased, inconsistent, and a convicted perjurer, you can argue the heck out of that during summation. But all this other stuff seems like a long walk through dry sand.
Anna, the other question and issue is if there is a pattern of someone in the district attorney's office becoming friendly with Cohen and sharing information that was yet to be shared with the public, that would be a line of questioning that could be, I think, very beneficial to the defense.
Well, I'm not totally sure about that. I have to agree. I'm not really sure where they're going. And I think one of the issues here is trying to balance what the client might want done during this cross-examination with what needs to be done during this cross-examination. So I agree with my colleague here that, really what they need to do is get in and get out. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is if they take too long with this, if they go into too many different stories, the jury is not going to follow it. They're not going to understand what's going on. On the other hand, they may be doing this because of pressure from their client, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's effective for the overall defense strategy.
And we have to remember that there was a day in between the cross-examination that began on Tuesday. And so I guess it's very likely that Trump had conversations.
Yeah, and if I may, I'm sorry to cut you off. I think Anna's exactly right. Think about it this way. If you were crossing Stormy Daniels, what do you want to adduce from her? I think one thing, that she has no idea how the books and records of the Trump Organization are maintained. She's never seen it done, and she's never talked to anyone who did it. End of story. But to your point, it may be that the client here wanted her cross-examined on other stuff. Stuff, by the way, that seems to me wholly irrelevant to the case. Where they had sex, whether they had sex, how they had sex, who cares? I mean, if you're going to cross-examine a witness, one way to do it is to take him or her out of the case entirely. She knows nothing of relevance to the maintenance of the books and records, but it might be the client who wants something else.
Right, and that's really the difficulty here, because when you have a client like this, you're trying to both please the client and do your job, and those don't always line up together.
Well, let's see how this testimony is going now. Blanche asked Cohen, you went on CNN in March last year and you said this case is like David versus Goliath, and you were describing yourself as David and Trump as Goliath. Blanche asked the question, Cohen, yes, sir. Blanche, and when you said that, you were describing yourself as David, okay, and the president as Goliath, correct? Cohen, correct. And you said you have Goliath on his back? Cohen, sounds right. Blanche, may we approach, Your Honor? Merchant, no. So the judge says no, you can't approach. That's interesting. Todd Blanche continues. Rosenberg, again referring to the detective here from the DA's office, Rosenberg complimented you and said, fantastic interview? Cohen, yes, sir. Blanche, do you remember going on TV on March 31st, going on with Joy Reid, when Detective Rosenberg complimented you on your interview with Joy Reid? And Cohen says, yes, sir. Blanche, that was at the same time that the Manhattan DA's office was telling you not to do TV, correct? Cohen, correct. Blanche, right around that time, going on the Mea Culpa podcast and talking about the indictment. Cohen, yes, sir. Duncan,
what do you see in this exchange?
Look, Michael Cohen does not work for the DA's office, and this seems to be one of many different lines of questioning in the cross-examination that have emerged over the past day of cross-examination. Michael Cohen didn't take direction from the DA. He was out there talking. He was upset that he didn't get a job. He was very wealthy. He was so upset when he didn't get a job, he's out to get Trump. There's nothing wrong with, quote unquote, leaking. And frankly, the DA's office should be objecting to that term. He didn't leak anything. He's a witness, and he's allowed, if he has information, he is allowed to talk about it. So there's nothing stopping a witness in a criminal investigation from going on a TV show. Now, this does obviously play into the fact that the DA's office has these uncontrollable witnesses. Much like the defense attorneys have an uncontrollable client in Donald Trump, there are uncontrollable witnesses. Stormy Daniels has been doing podcasts and writing things, and so is Michael Cohen. But Michael Cohen's direct examination was really devastating for two reasons. One, having to do with the case, because in 3 words, he said he approved it. He turned what was a circumstantial case against Donald Trump, where the prosecution could stand up at the end of the case in front of the jury and say, do you really think that this penny pinching guy who didn't pay his lawyers was just signing these $35,000 checks and had no idea what it was? Well, Michael Cohen's testimony, if you credit it as a juror, is devastating to that defense case, because it makes what was a circumstantial case into a direct case. But it was also worse than that, because whereas in the Stormy Daniels testimony, Donald Trump came off kind of as a predator and icky. You know, he's sitting there in his robe like Hugh Hefner, and there was that vivid testimony about Stormy Daniels shaking while she was putting on her gold-heeled shoes. Now there's such criminality in Michael Cohen's testimony, because Michael Cohen is saying, after his apartment is raided, Michael Cohen is saying, I got you. I'm the president of the United States. The FBI works for me. He's acting like a thug. And whereas that may not actually bear on the case itself, his testimony is devastating, and this approach to throwing all of this stuff at Michael Cohen is just pretty ineffective.